When we think about the story of Cain, the first recorded murderer in humanity according to the Bible, a question always arises that has puzzled believers and scholars for centuries. Where did his wife come from? It is a fascinating mystery, one that the Bible mentions briefly but does not explicitly detail. However, to attempt to solve this enigma, we must first go back to the beginning of everything, to the Garden of Eden and the first humans, Adam and Eve. According to the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve were directly created by God as the first parents of humanity. From them came the entire human race. The biblical accounts particularly highlight three of his sons, Cain, Abel, and later Seth. However, we also know that Adam lived 930 years, and that he had many more sons and daughters, although their names and lives were not mentioned in the scriptures. Why do they only focus on Cain, Abel, and Seth? Perhaps because their stories contain crucial lessons for humanity, while the rest of Adam's descendants remain as a backdrop in the biblical narrative. This is where the mystery of Cain's wife gains strength. Was she one of those daughters of Adam and Eve not mentioned? Or could there be another explanation? This gap in the narrative leaves plenty of room for speculation, and over the centuries, numerous theories have emerged to fill those gaps. What is clear is that the story of Cain's wife begins right at this point, in a narrative gap that invites us to imagine, reflect, and debate about the origins of humanity. Stay and let's discover together the truth behind this fascinating story. Write in the comments where you are watching us from, and if you have had any questions about this enigma. At the same time, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. After committing the terrible murder of his brother Abel, Cain faced divine justice. God confronted him directly, exposing the horror of his act and pronouncing a punishment that would mark him forever. He would be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. But even in the midst of this judgment, there was a glimpse of mercy. God placed a mark on Cain, not as an additional punishment, but as a sign to protect him. That mark warned anyone who tried to kill him that they would suffer a vengeance 7 times greater. Thus, Cain, bearing the weight of his sin and his separation from God, set off into exile. It was then that Cain settled in the land of Nod, a place briefly described in the Bible as located east of Eden. This is an intriguing point in the narrative, as Nod symbolizes more than a physical place. It represents isolation, separation from God, and the uncertain life that Cain had to face. But against all odds, his story does not end there. In Nod, the Bible mentions something that completely changes the course of events. Cain knew his wife. This is where the story takes a fascinating turn. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? Genesis chapter 4, verse 17 tells us that together they had a son named Enoch. Cain, far from living as a mere nomad, founded a city that he named in honor of his son. This detail is surprising. A man marked as a fugitive and condemned to isolation not only found a companion, but also began a lineage and a settlement that left a significant mark on the biblical narrative. But the mystery of his wife remains a central theme. If Adam and Eve were the only parents of humanity, logic suggests that this woman could have been one of Cain's sisters, a daughter of Adam and Eve not directly mentioned in the story. Although this fact may be disconcerting from a modern perspective, in the context of the beginnings of humanity, where the population was limited, marriage between siblings would have been necessary for the expansion of humanity. However, this is not the only theory. Some interpreters speculate that Nod could have been a symbolic place, a reference to human communities beyond the direct descendants of Adam and Eve. These hypotheses open up a range of possibilities, but what is clear is that, at this point, the narrative turns towards the expansion of humanity. Cain, despite his sin and punishment, played a role in the foundation of civilization, and his wife was fundamental in this process. When we delve into the enigma of Cain's wife, one of the most intriguing questions in biblical narrative, we encounter a range of theories that attempt to fill the void left by the account. The Bible does not explicitly mention her identity or origin, but that has not prevented theologians, historians, and curious readers from reflecting on the topic. The answers, although varied, lead us to explore both the context of early humanity and the deeper implications of the narrative. The most accepted and widely supported theory is that Cain's wife was one of his sisters or a niece. Genesis 5 verse 4 mentions that Adam lived 930 years and had sons and daughters. Although the biblical narrative only highlights Cain, Abel, and Seth, it is implied that there were other descendants. At that time, marriage between close relatives was not only common but essential for the survival of humanity. If Adam and Eve were the first and only progenitors, all of humanity would have had to arise from their direct descendants, which implies that the first marriages necessarily occurred between siblings or nephews. This, of course, raises questions from a modern perspective, but in the context of the beginnings of humanity, where genetic purity would not have been an issue yet, it makes sense. However, this is not the only interpretation. Another intriguing, albeit less conventional, theory proposes that there may have been other human populations created by God parallel to Adam and Eve. According to this perspective, Adam and Eve would be the progenitors of the lineage chosen by God for his redemptive plan, while other human communities might have inhabited the earth outside of Eden. If this were the case, Cain's wife would have come from these parallel populations. Although this theory does not have solid support in the biblical text, it raises interesting questions about how humanity could have expanded beyond the direct lineage of Adam and Eve. Lastly, there are those who consider the story of Cain and his wife as a symbolic narrative, designed more to convey spiritual lessons than to provide a detailed historical record. According to this interpretation, the identity of Cain's wife would not be relevant because the main purpose of the narrative is to address themes such as sin, divine justice, and God's mercy. In this view, the lack of historical details is not a problem, but an invitation to reflect on the underlying teachings of the story. Each of these theories offers us a unique perspective, but they all point to a deeper truth. The story of Cain and his wife is not just a mystery to be solved, but an opportunity to explore the complexities of humanity and God's plan for it. The narrative is not limited to a simple genealogical account. Instead, it invites us to think about the intersections of faith, history, and symbolism. And so, the mystery of Cain's wife remains a reminder that, in the Bible, the unanswered questions are often the ones that make us reflect the most. Regardless of her origin, Cain's wife played a crucial role in the continuity of humanity and in the building of her husband's legacy. Although the Bible does not mention her name or detail her life, her impact is undeniable. Together, Cain and his wife had a son named Enoch, and through his lineage, key cultural aspects developed that shaped the early generations of humanity. The birth of Enoch not only marked the continuation of Cain's lineage, but also symbolized a new beginning. It was in honor of his son that Cain founded a city, which he named Enoch. This action, mentioned in Genesis 4 verse 17, carries profound symbolic weight. In the midst of punishment and exile, the founding of a city represents Cain's attempt to leave a tangible legacy, something that would endure beyond his own sin-marked life. Perhaps, in his heart, this act was a form of redemption, an attempt to build something lasting to compensate for the emptiness and guilt that had accompanied him since Abel's death. The lineage of Cain also left a significant mark on early human culture. Genesis 4 mentions their descendants as pioneers in essential areas such as music, represented by Jubal, and metallurgy, developed by Tubal-Cain. These cultural advances not only reflect the creative capacity of humanity, but also the resilience of a family marked by sin and exile. In this context, Cain's wife played a fundamental role as a mother and companion, being the support that allowed the continuation of this lineage and the transmission of these skills to future generations. Beyond its direct impact on the descendants, its presence in history also brings a perspective of hope. Despite the tragic circumstances and the burden of sin, life went on. In a world marked by the fall, Cain's wife represents a turning point. The possibility that even in the midst of the worst circumstances, something good can arise. She, alongside Cain, helped lay the foundations for human development in a time when every step was an act of perseverance. Thus, while Cain bore the mark of his sin and the memory of his crime, his wife was a fundamental part of his story. Without her, there would have been no continuation of his lineage, nor the possibility of building something that transcended his own failure. And it is in this legacy, full of contradictions and complexity, where we find a reflection of humanity itself, imperfect but capable of moving forward even in the shadows of sin. So, what does the story of Cain's wife leave us with? At first glance, she may seem like a minor character, a figure mentioned almost incidentally in Genesis. However, her presence is much more symbolic than it appears. She represents continuity in a world that was just beginning to take shape after the fall of Adam and Eve, a world already marked by sin and separation from God. It is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope and possibilities for redemption. Cain's wife, although she remains in the shadows of the biblical narrative, played an essential role in the history of humanity. It was she who, alongside Cain, allowed for the expansion of the human lineage and the construction of the first city. And while this story is tinged with sin and tragedy, it is also a reflection of God's plan, which moves forward even when humans fail. Every detail of the story, from the founding of Enoch to the cultural advancements of his descendants, speaks to us of the resilience of humanity under divine sovereignty. But beyond the historical details and theories about its origin, this story invites us to reflect on something deeper: our own humanity. Cain's wife is a symbol of human relationships and how they can flourish even in the most adverse circumstances. It reminds us that our decisions, no matter how small or large they may seem, have a lasting impact on those around us and on future generations. In our daily lives, this story teaches us the importance of facing our decisions with wisdom and humility. It speaks to us about the need to seek reconciliation, to learn from our mistakes, and to value the relationships that sustain us. It also challenges us to recognize the power of divine mercy, which even in the midst of judgment offers opportunities to move forward. In the end, the story of Cain and his wife is not just a tale about the past, but an invitation to look towards our present and future. What legacy are we building? How do we face our own internal struggles and our relationships with others? These questions, although they arise from an ancient tale, are profoundly relevant in our current lives. And this is where we conclude this journey. Cain's wife, although not deeply detailed in the biblical text, has a voice that still resonates in our collective history. She is a testament to God's grace and the human capacity to rise even after falling. The question is, what will we do with the opportunities that God gives us? Will we leave a legacy of hope and redemption, or will we succumb to the weight of our own failures? The answer, as always, lies in our response to God, seeking His wisdom and help. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to our channel to continue learning about the epic retelling of biblical stories.